Hi, Janelle here with Sheep Hill Herbs. Welcome to my channel and welcome to another video. Today is another interview video day, so I will be interviewing with Zoom here. It's kind of, I don't really like the quality as much as my regular videos, but hopefully it's loud enough and clear enough. So today I'm going to be talking with Amanda Nicole, and she is an herbalist, a plant healer. And I met her recently, and we just clicked right away. We both have a lot of kids, which is usually one way you click with someone when you often have a big family, because you just get each other. Anyway, she is a deep soul, I would say, an old soul, super sweet. Super, just everything about her is just very healing, and she only got that way through her own personal healing, which was I want to say a long journey, and at times a very difficult journey. Right. So Amanda is now here. She has joined me in our lovely meeting, but I want to finish introducing her. So Amanda Nicole is a daughter, a teacher, a mother, and a healer. She is extremely gifted at hearing from the plants and knowing, I guess, through intuition, what works for people, what plants are being called for that person. So I sat down and had a really nice healing session with Amanda. And Amanda, what do you call your sessions? I forget. What do you specifically call them on your website?
They're called guidance sessions, plant medicine guidance sessions.
So we had a guidance session, and it was really special, and it was different than any other session I've ever had. It really spoke to where I was emotionally, or where I am right now. And she brought up a few plants that I already felt a calling towards, one being black walnut and another blueberry, which is one of my favorites. But then other plants that I haven't had in my radar, or haven't felt called to personally. So I really appreciated her ability to see that for me. I want to just share with you her website. It is called www, or you can find it at www.alchemillas. I don't know why I'm having trouble with that.
Alchemillas.
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 ALCHEMILLAS.com. I think of alchemy, the alchemist, and that's what I want to say. And her website is very beautiful. And I think I forgot to say that I would call Amanda an artist. She's very poetic and has beautiful writings. There's poems on her website. I would definitely encourage you to read her poems. They're healing just reading them. And there are podcasts. She has a lot of really good information on her website. So I'm really happy to sit down with you here today, Amanda. Thank you so much for your time. You're so patient and so giving. So thank you. And I just want to start by asking you to share with everyone how you found yourself in the plant world as an herbalist, as someone working with plants, kind of like that tipping point.
It was definitely a tipping point. That's a good way to describe it. It was a tipping point in a lot of ways. So when I was younger, I loved the plants. I loved being outside. I loved the outdoors, but I wasn't encouraged to cultivate that way of being. It was considered maybe a waste of time and too much imagination. And then with my Christian upbringing, conservative Christian upbringing, there was always the concern that, being too into nature, especially in the way I was interested in it, was considered what they would call New Age or pagan. Yeah. So I left that, because I wanted to be with God, and I was being told that wasn't the way. so I left those things and grew up, went to college, was an English lit major. That's why I like all the writing and the talking and poetry. And I ended up by accident marrying a pastor, and it was by accident. I had told everyone as I was growing up I was not marrying a pastor because my pastor would always try to pair me up with what he considered suitable young men that would come and visit the church, and went to very, conservative religious schools. And I said, I'm not marrying a pastor. I said I wouldn't make a pastor's wife. But then I met someone, we got married. He was going to be a professor, and then he turned into a pastor. And so I was a pastor's wife for a very long time in a very conservative Christian church. And it was extraordinarily stressful for all the reasons people might think, and maybe reasons they wouldn't think of. It was just a lot of rules, a lot of regulations, a lot of expectation, especially as a young mom with small children, and being the youngest person in the congregation, and yet being the woman that was considered the most public and supposed to lead, even though I had to lead quietly, silently. So it was very stressful, and I had 3 young children, and after the birth of my 3rd child, my health was not good. I was not well, and there were all sorts of symptoms that came with saying I wasn't well. But the predominant one, and the one that was the most painful, was that I started to miscarry babies. And in the span of about 3.5 years, I had 7 consecutive miscarriages, and along with a lot of other physical symptoms, just I wasn't well. But when I would go to the
can I interrupt you?
Go ahead.
I cannot believe how many miscarriages you've had. And I mean, I would love to just sit and talk about how you healed from that, because I know women with one and are still struggling to heal. And I mean, that is just so traumatic. I don't know, maybe it's in your book, which I'm going to have you share later, but I just wanted to interject that. I applaud you. That would be so difficult.
It was very difficult, especially one as a woman, as a human, to, I don't like all the words. They say lose a baby, but I didn't lose my babies. They weren't lost. And I also don't like the word miscarry, because it says that I didn't carry it right, but that's not true either. So it was just a lot of grief, because it was a lot of loss. And it was in a context where I couldn't express that grief, really. I wasn't allowed, because of my role and because of people's thoughts about faith. I do remember one person saying to me in that context, if I had more faith, I wouldn't be grieving so much. So I grieved alone a lot. I bled alone a lot. I remember bleeding so much that, just low blood pressure and weak. But I was the pastor's wife, and I needed to host a baby shower. But I was so weak, I was laying on my bathroom floor while people were showing up at my house, trying to get my act together to go host this baby shower. So it was rough. So yeah, it was rough. But like you said, it was a tipping point. It changed a lot of things. And so I'm very thankful for all of those little beings that came and went, because they sort of steered my path. So sometime we can talk about how I came to have 3 more children. After that, I have 6 children, and all 6 living children. I know, right? I actually told the woman who helped me, she was an acupuncturist, and so I was well again, and then I was, expecting what people call, your rainbow baby, my 4th baby. But then when I was expecting the 5th one, I said to her, I just wanted to stop having miscarriages. I wasn't trying to have, a lot more children. But I'm thankful, because really my children are very much a part of my path. They're very much a part of my healing. So, but what happened in that context that led me to herbalism was as often happens for people, allopathic medicine, mainstream medicine, it didn't have anything to say to me because I didn't fit their boxes and their rubrics. So a lot of times they'll tell women you have low progesterone, and that is the case for some women.
Yeah.
But there's sort of these boxes that they check, and I wasn't fitting any of those boxes. And so I actually had an older doctor. He'd been practicing for decades. And I went to him at some point, I don't remember which miscarriage it was after, but he said to me, it was just a phase. I was just going through a phase. And I thought to myself, you went to school for all those years to tell me this is a phase, because even I know that's not the case. That's not the case. Like something is not okay. It's not well. So I did what a lot of people do. I started doing my own research and, self-diagnosing. And what ended up happening was
that in between the miscarriages and successful 3 pregnancies, your last 3 that you did that research?
Yes.
Okay.
So I had the first 3 children, and then that season of loss and healing, and then the next 3 children.
Okay.
So I ordered a book from Amazon called The Infertility Cure.
Oh.
And when it showed up, I saw that it was written, it said, like the subtitle said, from a traditional Chinese medicine perspective. And I immediately saw that and thought, oh, I'm sending it back. This isn't going to help me. I didn't know it was written from that perspective, but because I wasn't familiar with it. And then that way of being wasn't approved. It wasn't acceptable. But before I sent it back, I just looked over to the contents page, and one of the pieces in the content page was immunological infertility, which is what I had self-diagnosed myself as. And I went and I read the chapter on it, and it was exactly what I had been experiencing physically. So I thought, I have to find myself an acupuncturist, and that wasn't allowed either, but I found one. And that's how it started, because she would give me Chinese herbs. So I would come home with these bags of literally, I have a picture of it somewhere on my computer. It's been a decade ago more.
Okay.
But it was this picture of roots and twigs. It's very, it's a very different experience really than from Western herbalism. And I would come home and I would make a decoction on my stove. And then I would drink it. And so that just opened the door to what we call alternative ways of healing, and doing yoga and massage, all quietly, all keeping most of it to myself because it wouldn't, be looked well on. And that opened the door to the plants, of course. And I remember ordering Rosemary Glad Stars. At the time, it was a correspondence course, her herbalism course. And I ordered it, and I remember reading the first lesson, which was on Mullen, and thinking to myself, I miss this. I remember this. I remember this from when I was small. I remember the plants. I remember being connected in this way. The interesting thing is, though, I didn't actually finish that course. I didn't even turn in my first assignment. I don't know if I've said this in other places, probably in private classes, but I couldn't answer the first question, which was, tell us about yourself. That was her first question.
Oh, wow.
The first is, yeah. So I've often wanted to write and say, maybe you could think of a different question, because maybe I'm not the only person who had trouble with that. But it was a very good question for her to ask in some ways, even though I didn't do another assignment. I didn't do another thing with that course. I put it aside. But I needed to figure out the answer to that question. Who are you? Who am I?
That is a really good question.
Yeah. And now I can answer it. I have to write bios all the time, for different things that I'm participating in. And I can do that. But also the answer is ongoing. We're never really defined. But that was part of it. And then
I hate to pause you here, but I do want to go back to something you said, and maybe you could expound on that, because it's honestly something that I still struggle with, and probably a lot of people do. And it's you've been, like, as we're talking, you're referring to like massage or yoga or going to an acupuncturist and it not being okay, like you did these things secretly. And the funny thing is, I grew up with a parent who was very supportive of all those kinds of I don't want to say alternative things, but just like spirituality. And then I had a stint in a very religious church and a very religious I married into a religious family. And even now, years later, I guess I still am not quite healed of that, where sometimes when I even talk about plants, I'm afraid like my peers or people I know that, or people I went to church with, are thinking I'm worshiping the created and not the creator. Or I remember the first time I think I did a blog post or something about yoga, and I was afraid like that they, who's going to read it, and I'm not, being real, it's like anti-Christian or something. And like I said, even now I still feel like a ping for certain things because I feel like I have to hide them. So I don't know. Could you share a little bit more about that from your journey?
Yeah, I can. And it's been a long journey and I'm still in it, but I can't tell you what an extraordinary thing it is, to sit here and talk to you about these things and not have any fear at all. But there's quite a story. A lot of life has been lived. But what I did was I wanted to be with God, and so if there were things that I was doing that were going to somehow separate me from God or separate me from the divine, which I don't actually think is possible now, then I didn't want to be participating in those things. So I prayed, I want to be well, I want to be healed, but I don't want that at the cost of being separate, from the divine.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because one morning I was reading in my Bible, having what they would call your daily devotions or your private worship. And I came across a passage, which happens so often because I do believe that the spirit, the divine spirit, can speak anywhere at any time. And I opened it up to the book of Revelation. And in the book of Revelation, I believe it's around like 19, 20, 21. I can't shoot it off the way I used to. Life is very different now. Which sometimes is sad, but sometimes is very good. And there's a passage there where it's talking about heaven. And it's saying that there's a tree there, and that this tree that's in heaven, that the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the people. And when I read that, the spirit, the divine spirit, the spirit of God let me know that there's your answer. Because if the leaves of the trees here are not for the healing of the people, then an image of a tree in heaven with leaves being for the healing of the people means nothing. It's an empty image. There's nothing to it. We're not as above, so below. We can't make that connection here. It's not an illustration that works for us. And so when I read that passage, I knew at that point I could at least drink tea. I knew I could at least do that. And so that sort of began a long journey. And there's been a lot of moments along the way where I would take a healing modality or a certain belief or practice that I was being presented with as I was in the herbal world and other worlds, other circles that surround it. And I would just pray, because I believed that, I still believe this, where whatever is true is of the divine. And so I would pray that I would be able to discern and know what is true, because wherever I was, whoever was saying it, whatever was being presented, didn't matter. If it was true, I could gather it up. And part of that actually came from my English lit background, not my church background, because I had a professor in college who talked about Tolkien. And in one of Tolkien's essays, he talks about how these these splinters of light that we see, they're all coming from the light. So whenever we're reading stories and we have these myths or fairy tales, any
Yeah.
light that's there is of the light. And so I carry that into these other, ways of being. And I could just go story after story after story of the answer to my question, being found. And there are some things I've laid aside or some places or practices, but for the most part, I've gathered up quite a lot that wouldn't be approved anymore. As a matter of fact, I think most people that are in the conservative church probably wouldn't consider me a Christian any longer.
Yeah.
But for me, my
Do you
heart,
consider yourself that anymore?
well, I don't consider myself a Christian in the mainstream conservative definition. They're right. We're not the same.
Yeah.
But I am a Christian in the definition of Christ. I do
Yeah.
believe in Christ. I do believe in Jesus. I do
Mm.
believe these things. And I know my own heart. It's interesting. People have lots of thoughts and judgments. But the heart that I had then, it's the same heart that I have now.
Yeah.
And who or what I loved then is who and what I love now. And I feel like the journey has really been an unveiling of the nature of God, of the divine. And that's like the primary way that I interact with the plants, is that I find them to be embodiments, expressions, conduits of the divine nature. And so when I was growing up in the church, they would talk about the book of nature. They would
Oh,
say,
yeah.
we should read the book of nature. God reveals itself, himself, herself in nature. They liked him. But it was always really simple things like nature is orderly, therefore God is orderly. But there's so much more to it than that. I was thinking about it before we were coming together. I don't know why it passed through my mind, but I was thinking about how it's so rich, it's so full, this way of knowing God, of knowing the divine in nature, of really reading the book, of really listening and hearing it. And I was thinking about how in the tradition I grew up in, the Baptist church, and then I was a pastor's wife in the Reformed, which is a very conservative branch of the Presbyterian church. They would really put an emphasis on the fact that the Bible was translated into what they called the vulgar tongues, the common language of the people. And that before that, it was hidden and tucked up in Latin in the Catholic Church, and the people couldn't have it. And so then when the Bible was translated into these vulgar tongues, as they put it, these common languages, then we get these translations of the Bible into these languages. And then they'll say, and that's why literacy has spread all over the globe and the Western world, or at least the Western world, so that people could read. There was more of an emphasis put on reading so people could read the scriptures. And I don't think that's bad. Obviously, I love books. I was an English lit major. I'm all for reading and literacy. But what I thought was, you don't have to be able to read to know God. You don't have to be able to read to connect to the divine. You don't have to be able to read to know the nature of the creator, the creation. You don't have to be able to read. And sometimes I feel like, and I'm not alone in this isn't an original thought to me, that book has been purposefully closed because of how powerful it is to have that just profound direct heart connection to the divine. So I'll stop there. That's quite an answer to you asking me how did you manage to move through?
Yeah. Well, that it's such an interesting topic, and I guess it's so hard to talk about herbs without going to spirituality. It's so connected. And I guess I hear so much of what you said and can relate to a lot of it. And for me personally, I came to a place where I found like, well, God is in everything. Like what would be considered not sacred or secular things. Like I still see God, or I can still hear God, or maybe I read a book that was not, a Christian based writer or something. Well, God spoke to me through this. So I really do feel like it's hearing the voice of God. And you said it exactly. You don't have to be able to read the Bible or read to hear the voice of God. I think it's being able to connect with spirit, and plants for me too have been an amazing conduit, very tangible way to connect. So every time I do one of these interviews, I learn so much from the other person, and I love sharing them on my YouTube channel because I'm just one person and I only one experience. So having so many other people and their experiences and how they're working with the plants and moving through the world is just, I think, so nice for me to be able to share more than just my own words. So anyway, let's go into the topic of the book you wrote, and it's called Flowers for a Girl. And I did not read it. I read your I guess the description of it on Amazon, and I'm very curious. I would like to get this book. Can you share this story? When did you write this?
I can't. Before I jump into the book, I'll just say, if people go to my website, there are poems there, and a lot of the poems that are there will answer some of the questions that they might have about how I blend together Christianity and plants. A lot of the plants have, a lot of the poems have that. I'm thinking of some of them right now that are like coming up in my head that are almost directly connected to things you just said. So people can go, they can read there. But my book, so the book is, the title is Flowers for a Girl, Plant Medicine and Sexual Trauma. It's available on my website, Amazon, Lulu. So the way this book came about is it wanted to be born. So what happened was, and this is so interesting what I find with the plants, we begin to work with the plants for a particular reason, or we begin to work with other modalities for a particular reason, something that we're wanting to heal or balance or shift in our bodies or our spirits, and then they go to work on the layers. And that's what happened. So I began to remember the trauma of my childhood, the sexual trauma of my childhood. And when I began to remember, the plants came immediately. And frankly, to be honest with you, it was the plants that helped me remember, to get strong enough to come to a place where you're strong enough to remember, where your body can handle it, because that is not an easy remembering. And then I could go into an herb class at this moment, but I won't. But like, I worked with Rose for 2 years before I began to remember, and I wasn't being intentional about it. I was just drawn to it. But one of the things that Rose does is it helps us see what we don't want to see, because we're afraid it's going to be too painful, and it holds our hearts and lets us know your heart isn't going to shatter. Like I'm holding you, I've got you. So 2 years of daily working with Rose, and I do believe that was a part of remembering. So when I began to remember, the plants were there right away. And when I began to work with a practitioner, an energy worker, she began with cranial sacral therapy, but then it was a combination of other modalities. The plants were there at every session. And what I would do is I would go home after my sessions and I would write down what I saw, and I would write down what I heard. And when I say what I saw and what I heard, it's not what people think. When I first started to remember, I really desired like a movie clip, like a movie reel for my memory, because then I thought if I had that, my family would believe me. If I could, give them this, detailed, factual, chronological, story. But what ended up happening was I would go and I would see plants, and I would see animals and I would have these visions and these journeys. And what it was, and this is so beautiful, it was my body healing in a way that wasn't going to be traumatic for me again. We're not going to replay this the same way. So whatever the wound is, whatever the emotions are that are here, and I'll give an example in a moment you can understand.
Okay.
We're going to work on those and we're going to present them in a way that your body can handle. And so I actually got to where I looked forward to my sessions because not only did I know that I was integrating and processing a part of me that was very wounded, but I was thinking, I can't wait to see what plant or animal, comes to the session. And so I would make notes. And then what happened at the end of that time, and then I'll go back to the example, was since I was little, since I was small, I knew I wanted to write a book. And I remember thinking this, in second grade when I could barely write a sentence. I'm not really sure how I know I was going to write a book. So I just always thought, I'm a writer, I'm going to write a book. But it wasn't encouraged, at least not anything worth, writing. I say that with some care because people say everything's worth writing, but I think people know what I mean. They say, write what you know. And I would think to myself, I don't know anything. That's what I would think sometimes about myself.
Yeah.
So I let that go. I became a pastor's wife. I became a mother. I didn't have anything to say, or I felt like I didn't, and I just let it go. And then
sounds like you lost yourself.
I lost myself. Listen, I'm telling you, with the plants, it's a journey. It's been a journey to find myself. I wrote that in my notebook this morning. Pause. Lady Slipper was the plant that came to me when I felt like it was presumptuous to call myself an herbalist. And Matthew Wood, which is one of my dearest teachers, said to me, you're going to have to get over that. Get over it. Call yourself an herbalist. And Lady Slipper helped me walk that path. It helped me say, I'm not being presumptuous. These shoes fit. I am an herbalist. This morning, what I realized after working with Lady Slipper for, almost 10 years, this morning I realized Lady Slipper did not help me become an herbalist. It did, but it did more. Lady Slipper helped me just be me. I'm going to presume to be myself.
Yeah.
These shoes fit me.
That's awesome. I love that.
So the plants, they do so much more than we ever think that they're, going to do. So I don't remember, I remember now. So I was going to the grocery store and I had lost myself and I was coming home from the grocery store. This is before I began to remember anything. And, a few years before, and I heard clear as a bell, clear, you're going to write a book, just clear as a bell. It was from outside of me. And I thought to myself, about what? And a lot of people assumed it would be about the miscarriages or being a pastor's wife, which is really difficult. But I was like, no, that's not the book. And then after I started to remember, and I was keeping these notes in my journals just for my own remembering, I looked down at them one day and I knew it. Amanda, this is a book. This is, I don't want to say it's the book because I don't know if it's the book because there's probably going to be more.
Yeah.
But it was the book at the time. And it's right here, just write it. So that's what I started to do. I started to organize it. And so my book is a story of a portion of my journey of remembering and integrating. And a lot of people don't like to use the word healing, especially when it comes to trauma, when it comes to plants and herbs. But on an emotional, spiritual level, I don't know what else. I don't know what other word to use.
I know what you mean.
So I use that. And so the book is broken up into plants. So black cohosh, lady slipper, violet, rose, those are some of the plants. And in that section, I tell a portion of the story, and it is in a poetic way of telling it. So I really try to let people know that it's not graphic, it's not factual. It's a story of my healing. Again, that's just what it is for me in my heart.
Yeah.
For my healing rather than a history of it. It's
Okay.
the plants that came and what I saw. And so the plants in each section connect to a portion of my journey and what was needing to be integrated at that time, what
Mm.
emotion was needing to be felt. So an example would be chicory is a plant that came to me. I think there's a section on chicory in the book. It's been a while since I wrote it and I talk about it all the time. But, you know, no, it was cleavers. Cleavers is in the book. So
Okay.
that's the example I'll use. So cleavers came to me, and it came for the session where I was needing to clear out rage. And I will use the word rage.
Mm.
The session before, my practitioner had said to me, "Do you feel that rage?" And I was so peaceful on the table because it's a body work session, it's an energy session. So I was so peaceful.
Yeah.
No, I don't feel any rage. I didn't feel any. And she said, "Well, let's try to feel it." And so she put her hands on a certain place on my back to sort of say, this is where you're keeping it, because we hold these things in our
Mm.
body. And she said, "Now try to feel it." And the second that she said that, and I opened myself up to try, I went into an immediate panic and I said to her, "I can't do that. I'm going to
Oh my
die on
gosh.
you," because I
Mhm.
felt like my heart will stop. That's how
Mm.
much rage and how powerful this rage is. I mean, I wasn't kidding with her. And she backed off and said,
Mm.
"We don't have to do it today. You don't have to do that." She said, "Maybe you won't ever. That's it." Well, immediately after that session, cleavers started coming like crazy, and I just couldn't get enough of cleavers. So I gathered it. I drank cleavers water, not knowing what was happening. And
Yeah.
then at my next session, when we went to be together, and that was a magical session. I'm not going to tell all because it's in the book and it would take up too much time.
Okay.
It's really beautiful. A lot more happened in that session than cleavers.
I
But
was
in
drawn to
that
cleavers
session,
last year. I drank.
it's an
So
amazing.
I'm wondering why, if I was dealing with rage or something, because I was juicing cleavers like all summer. I,
Well, I'll tell you the story and maybe you'll know because it's usually connected to the lymphatic system.
Mm.
And part of what I'm going to offer will sound like the lymphatic system. And then also it's connected to the nervous system, which is
Yeah.
very much at play when you're working with trauma. So when I went to the next session, not knowing how cleavers would play a part, she said, "Let's try that again. Let's try to feel the rage." So I opened my heart up and suddenly I saw cleavers. And for those of you that know cleavers, you know, it's this stem and then it has those
Yeah.
whorls, you know, down it. It looks like a chimney sweep, you know, like for Mary Poppins, how they would use
Yeah.
that to clean the chimneys. And she told me, cleavers told me that she would take care of this. And I looked down at my heart, and this is so terrible, but there was all of this like black sludgy ooze
Mm.
bubbling up out of a place in my heart. And she jumped down it, her chimney sweep self, and she just kept pulling it up. And she told me she was going to do it until the waters ran clean. And I knew she could do it. So in this vision I was having, I I went to work with her and I started helping her, you know, pull up this cleavers, and the water ran clean. And that was it. We were done. And the thing that's so amazing about that is during that session, I didn't feel rage. You understand what I'm saying? I didn't
Yeah.
feel it. I
Yeah.
remained peaceful. I remained relaxed. But with the help of that plant and what I call the spirit of the plant spirit
Mhm.
medicine, this energy, this vibration, moved that out. So that's
Mm.
what I mean. And so I went home and I wrote about that and a lot of other really lovely things that happened in that session. And some things aren't in the book, maybe another book.
Okay.
And that's what came together to be the book. And my hope was that when people when people read the book, that there will be parts of my story where I'm touching on certain emotions or plants
Mm.
or images that will resonate with them. And that maybe they'll say, "I want to go work with Violet," or "I
Mm.
want to go work with, you know, blue cohosh." Or as you said, which I was so glad when you said this, maybe just reading it and
Yeah.
reading just the words and the energy that's there and the vibration that's there will
Mm.
be the essence of the plant, you know, for them.
True.
So that's that's quite a That's quite an explanation of what the book is. But it's so different. I don't know what to call it yet. Sometimes
Well,
I
it
thought
sounds
early.
very different. It sounds very different, but I want to get it because that my journey right now has brought me to this place of looking for these emotional pieces and how the plants can help me move through that. So I'll have to order the book after after our interview.
Yeah, and once you read it, you'll have to, let me know how it strikes you, if it
Oh,
resonates.
totally. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking of some people who I do work with and who would probably totally benefit from it too. So I think as much as I want to keep going on and on, I think we're going to have to stop here. And is there anything else you want to share though, Amanda, before we go? I know I shared your website. Do you have any other connection tools you want to share with us, or any other parting plant wisdom you want to share?
No, they're welcome to visit my website, Alchemillas, which I mentioned to you before we started, is the Latin name for lady's mantle.
Okay.
And Alchemillas vulgaris, the little alchemist. So there is a lot of alchemy that I do think is part of the medicine that I have to offer the world, taking the things that maybe are darker or more base or difficult and transmuting them to something that's hopefully light-filled and lovely and beneficial, beauty. So that's the website, and there they'll find the book, some poetry, the links for the guidance sessions. I do have some class offerings up right now, but there aren't any opening and starting that are group, but I do have virtual, I call them virtual residencies. So they're just one-on-one, basically plant mentorship. I just don't like that term. I like the residency idea better, but there are some shifts and changes coming to the website. So if people go and they decide to join the newsletter, there's some blueberry medicine to be had. And then there's going to be some shifts and changes because just like you said, for me, I began working with plants in the physical realm, for fevers and coughs, and I've just slid completely over to the spirit and the emotions. And I just want to do more of that work in more of an exclusive way. And I really think that's where it's at. And so I guess to wind it up, I just have a great desire for people to connect with the plants in that way, in a heart way, a spirit way, an energy way, because for me to do that, they're like portals. They are portals to the divine. Going back to what you said at the beginning, I think I mentioned you in a private conversation that, I was kicked out of a Christian herbalist group because of my thoughts on plants, because of this idea that you're worshiping the creation rather than the creator.
Yeah,
whereas for me, they're just portals to move through to become closer to the divine, and they're here, I believe, to help us embody that divinity in ways that I'm sure there are other ways to do it, like stones or other ways, but for me, the plants are just like ephemeral magic. I don't know, in the best way. I've never had my heart so ministered to by the divine. There's a poem I wrote that says, I've just learned so much more from sitting with the tulip poplar tree than all the sermons, that I've listened to, and they helped me. I'm thankful for the sermons I heard.
Yeah.
But there's no mediator. There's no mediator when I'm sitting there with tulip poplar. It's just a direct conduit. So that's my desire, is that the plants will not only be beneficial to the body, but get to the soul of it, and really do that work, reminding us of what it is to be human, which is to be divine. The Christian church says we're created in the image of God. So let's do it. Like, let's embody it. So that's really how I like to approach the plants.
Well, I definitely think your mission or your purpose shines through your work for sure. And I feel healing through your words, and it makes me want to like sit more with the plants. I guess I have made them maybe from the way I was raised or the way culture makes nature kind of like inanimate, I'm like changing my mind or rewiring my mind to think of them not that way, just like this object, like, you know, how people who are not used to plants, and I don't want to say this in a bad way, I've thought this before, when you don't know any plants, you think of them as just weeds, you know, just get them out of here. So it's your mission, that purpose of the soul of the plant, I definitely think shines through. And
I highly recommend sitting with the plants and taking a notebook, because you're probably going to hear, feel something. And just going back to the Christian church, just real quick on that point, I had to wrestle with that. And one of the things that I thought about were the scripture passages where it says, you know, Jesus himself says, if you don't praise me, the rocks will cry out. Well, either they can cry out, or Jesus is a liar. So I've got to believe they have that ability. Or when it says the trees of the field clap their hands, and in the Psalms where it says the deep calls to deep, you know, rejoicing in the divine. You know, it has all these images in the scriptures of creation, singing, dancing, clapping. And so I just felt like if the creation is not actually feeling any of this, these words don't mean anything, you know? So I would just encourage people who struggle with that to, you know, go to the concordance like we do, you know, find your keyword.
Okay.
Go look these things up. Yeah. And just see how some of those passages strike you, because the whole world is alive, you know, it's all living, it's all the breath of the divine, and breath is what we see. It's inspired, it's alive, it's living. So I'll stop now. I love it so much.
Well, that is just so beautiful. Thank you so much, Amanda. And we'll have to talk again in the future. Well, definitely privately, but on YouTube, I'd like to interview you again and go into another area or topic, because there's just so much that you have to share. So thank you. I'm going to pause the video and come again, YouTubers. Like this video, subscribe, leave a comment down below, and go check out Amanda's website and her book. Thanks again.